The neighborhood of Willow Bend was the kind of place where the grass was cut a little too short. Mailboxes had matching paint, and everyone waved whether they meant it or not. At first glance, it looked like the American dream. But for David Cole, it was just a safe landing spot after a nightmare. A former Marine and now a single father, David had moved into the modest corner house with his 16-year-old daughter, Emma, just 6 months ago. His wife, Lydia, had passed suddenly. Cancer doesn't knock, it barges in, and when it leaves, it doesn't take the grief with it. So David did what he could. He ran far from memory and into routine. Willow Bend was supposed to be that routine. Emma, quiet and brilliant, lived in a world that moved to a different rhythm. Diagnosed with autism early on, she found peace in patterns, in paint, and in the safety of home. Her favorite thing to do was set up her easel in the front yard every Saturday morning and paint whatever came to her. Sunlight, shadows, old trees, storm clouds. She saw more than most people ever would. And David, he just sat on the porch with his coffee, letting her world breathe, until Karen showed up. Her real name was Madeline Stark, but no one called her that. Even the welcome sign outside the HOA office joked, "Karen is watching." Blonde bob, aggressive sunglasses, and a clipboard that probably had a direct line to the county sheriff's office. Karen had lived in Willow Bend for 14 years and considered it not just her neighborhood, but her kingdom. She ran the HOA like a royal court, and everyone was guilty until proven obedient. The first warning came like a love letter dipped in venom. An official notice citing unauthorized yard clutter and unsightly structures visible from the street. The offending structure, Emma's easel and paint stool. David laughed at first, thinking it had to be a mistake. But when he looked across the street, there she was, Karen, standing stiff with her arms crossed. Watching them like a hawk with a law degree, David didn't engage. He cleaned up Emma's things and gently explained. Emma didn't cry, she just stopped painting for the day. But David didn't miss the way her fingers twitched as she stared out the window that night. A week later, it escalated. Karen returned, this time during the afternoon, when David was working from home and Emma was outside sketching. Karen walked straight onto their lawn. She didn't knock. She didn't ask. She stood over Emma, arms crossed, and said, "This is not a personal art studio. This is a residential zone." David rushed out the moment he saw it from the window. His voice was calm, measured, but firm. Karen didn't back off. Instead, she said, "Your daughter needs to be kept inside. We have standards here." That night, Emma wouldn't speak. She tore the page from her sketchbook and shredded it. David held her for hours while the silence hung in the air like poison. The next morning, there was a new notice taped to their door. This one was worse. It accused Emma of being a disruptive visual presence and warned of potential compliance fines. David stared at it for a long moment, then calmly walked to the garage and pulled out the security cameras he hadn't bothered to install yet. Karen had made a mistake. She thought she was dealing with another passive neighbor, but David hadn't spent 20 years in combat zones just to be intimidated by a woman with a clipboard. As he drilled in the last camera, he looked across the street. Karen stood by her mailbox, holding that same smug posture. But this time, he didn't just see an annoying neighbor. He saw the beginning of a war. And this time, it was personal. The cameras weren't just for show. David had installed them in all four corners of his property, with one tucked beneath the gutter pointing toward the sidewalk, and another aimed squarely at the mailbox and front yard. The night after Karen's outburst, he stayed up past midnight reviewing angles and adjusting sensitivity. He didn't want evidence after the damage, he wanted it before. 2 nights later, The footage gave him exactly what he needed. At 2:14 a.m., Karen walked up the driveway with a flashlight. She wore what looked like surgical gloves and carried a pair of garden shears. No hesitation. She marched right over to Emma's art easel, which David had let her set up again. Under the porch light and clipped one of the legs. The easel tipped sideways and cracked on the concrete. Karen bent over, picked up one of Emma's paintbrushes, and snapped it in half. Then she walked away. David didn't say a word. He just sat in his office chair, fingers steepled, watching the grainy black and white footage over and over. He wasn't even angry anymore. He was calculating. At 7 a.m., Emma came downstairs groggy-eyed, holding her sketchbook close to her chest. When she opened the front door and saw the broken easel, she didn't scream. She just stood there. And then, slowly, she turned around and walked back inside without a word. That morning, David sent an email with the security footage to the HOA board. No commentary. Just the link and a subject line that read, "Criminal trespass and vandalism video attached." He didn't expect a parade, but he expected something instead. The reply came 6 hours later. The HOA does not mediate personal disputes. Please refrain from making unsubstantiated claims. Unsubstantiated. He watched the word hang on the screen like a dirty joke. Karen had covered her tracks well. No direct damage to the home. No verbal threats. Just enough plausible deniability to get a pass. But David had been trained to read people. And Karen, she wasn't careful because she was smart. She was careful because she'd done this before. Later that evening, David took Emma for a drive. They ended up parked on a hill just outside town, where they could see the skyline blinking with twilight. Emma sat quietly, hands in her lap. "Do you want to move?" David asked gently. Emma shook her head. "She hates me," she said finally. "No." David said, "She fears what she doesn't understand. And people like that, they make mistakes when they think they're invincible." Emma didn't reply, but she leaned her head on his shoulder. By the time they got home, the front yard had been hit again. This time, someone had spray painted the sidewalk in red. "Silence is golden." David didn't check the cameras yet. He didn't call the police. He didn't file another complaint with the HOA. He walked inside, closed the front door, and pulled a plain black duffel bag from his hall closet. It had been sealed since he retired. Inside were layers of gear, non-lethal, but precise. Audio recorders, motion-activated decoys, night vision trail cams. David was no longer documenting. He was baiting. That night, while the neighborhood settled into quiet dinners and late news, David placed a fresh canvas on a new easel, this one rigged with a tripwire and microphone. Then he sat on his porch in the shadows, coffee in hand, and waited. And just before 2 a.m., he saw her again. Karen, walking barefoot across the lawn like she owned it. But this time, when she reached the easel and raised her hand to knock it over, a loud metallic click echoed from the nearby tree. She froze. Then, for the first time, Karen looked directly into one of the cameras and blinked. Something was different. Because this time, she realized someone wasn't just watching. They were hunting. The click had been loud enough to make Karen flinch, but not enough to chase her off. Instead, she slowly backed away from the easel, trying to make it look like she had never touched it. She looked up into the camera lens again, then turned and walked calmly down the driveway like nothing had happened. David didn't chase her. He didn't even stand. He just sat there in the dark with his coffee cooling in his hands, watching her retreat like a raccoon caught near a trash can. By morning, the tripwire camera had sent him everything. 4 angles, full face, time-stamped. Karen, caught again. But this time, David didn't send it to the HOA board. He sent it to the neighbors. One by one. He forwarded the video in private emails to every single homeowner whose address he had. More than 24. No commentary. Just a short message. Thought you should see who's been walking across your lawns. 2 by noon, whispers were rippling across Willow Bend. Karen was no longer just the HOA busybody. She was the woman sneaking barefoot through front yards with tools and spray cans. It wasn't just his daughter's art being targeted anymore. David had planted the seed of doubt and Karen didn't even know it yet. But she'd feel it soon. That afternoon, Emma returned from school early. Her art teacher had asked her to submit something for the district showcase. Emma hesitated, then smiled and whispered, "Only if I can paint outside." David didn't hesitate. He helped her set up a brand new easel right on the lawn again, this time reinforced with anchors and motion sensors. The canvas glowed white under the sun, and Emma dipped her brush into cobalt blue like nothing had happened. Across the street, Karen's front curtain twitched. David waited. At precisely 3:12 p.m. A black SUV pulled into his driveway. It wasn't the cops. It was Greg Simmons, former HOA vice president, retired Navy. He had been Karen's right hand when David first moved in, but left the board quietly 2 months ago. No one ever said why. He stepped out of the SUV, nodded to David, and looked at Emma painting. "She's got talent," Greg said. David nodded. "And more strength than most adults I know," Greg sighed. "I've seen the footage. You're not the first one she's harassed, but you might be the first one who hit back hard enough to wake people up." David watched him carefully. "Why now?" Greg looked down. "Because last year, she called code enforcement on a man with Parkinson's, claimed his tremors made him unfit to operate a weed trimmer, got him fined, moved to a nursing home for months later." David clenched his jaw. "And you stayed quiet." "I was complicit," Greg admitted. "But I'm not anymore." David's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" "I want to help burn her to the ground," Greg said quietly. "And I have the HOA's internal reports to start the fire." They shook hands. That evening, Emma finished her painting a haunting portrait of a crow in flight over barbed wire. She titled it, "Freedom from the Fence." It was beautiful, uncomfortable, unforgettable. David took a photo and shared it on the neighborhood app. By midnight, it had more likes than any post in Willow Bend history. But it also triggered something else, because the next morning, Karen wasn't lurking behind curtains. She was standing on David's lawn. And she wasn't alone. 3 uniformed HOA officers stood with her clipboard, measuring tape, and a printed violation packet. David stepped outside, keeping calm. Karen smiled sweetly. "This is an unsanctioned outdoor structure, and we're here to notify you of fines and legal action. Also, your daughter's mural has been classified as political signage." "That's a violation of Section 4B. David said nothing. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and played the 2:14 a.m. clip. Karen with the shears under the porch light, caught in perfect detail. Karen's smile faded. The whole officers looked at each other. David leaned forward, his voice low but deadly calm. "You came for my daughter, but now I'm coming for every bylaw you've ever broken." One of the HOA officers took a step back. Another muttered, "I didn't sign up for this." Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The neighborhood was done whispering. It was about to start shouting. The moment Karen realized the video was being shown to her own HOA officers, something in her posture changed. Her arms, usually locked in permanent judgment, now twitched slightly at her sides. Her mouth opened like she was ready to fire back, but the words never found her. Not with that video playing loud and clear in the center of the front yard. David didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth was loud enough on its own. "Leave," he said simply. One officer lowered his clipboard without a word. Another turned to Karen, muttering that they weren't getting involved in anything criminal. By the time David had shut the front door behind him, the entire group was already scattering like leaves in the wind. Karen stood in the middle of the sidewalk for nearly 30 seconds before finally walking away alone. But she wasn't quiet. By that evening, the neighborhood app exploded. Karen's version of the story hit first. She painted herself as a victim of intimidation, claimed David had weaponized surveillance, and accused her of imaginary crimes. She called Emma's artwork aggressive graffiti and questioned whether unstable families belonged in Willow Bend at all. But then came the footage. Greg, the ex-HOA vice president, posted the full video with a caption that read, "This is what leadership has looked like for too long." It went viral not just on the app, but across community forums in the county. Within 12 hours, 2 more families came forward with eerily similar stories: property trespassing, unjust fines, and silent intimidation. One woman wrote, "She fined us for having a tricycle on our porch. My son's 5. He cried when it vanished." Another posted a photo of a dying flower bed and wrote, "She sprayed it herself. Caught her glove in the drainpipe. Still has the tag on it, HOA covered. For her." The tide was turning, but Karen didn't give up. She doubled down. 2 days later, a formal letter from the HOA's legal representative arrived on David's doorstep. It accused him of defamation, unauthorized surveillance distribution, and endangering community leadership. Emma opened it before David did and quietly handed it to him, trying not to let her hands shake. David didn't even blink. He scanned it once, then tossed it onto the kitchen counter. "She's scared," he said flatly. That night, Greg returned, this time with a thumb drive and a tired expression. Inside were over 2 years of internal HOA emails, fake fines, manipulated complaint forms, doctored landscaping invoices, even copies of Karen's HOA meeting notes where she referred to residents by nicknames, like the lawn people, Ms. Netflix mailbox, and worst of all, Emma was Paint Girl. David stayed up until 4 a.m., organizing it all into folders, backing it up to drives, and crafting a report so bulletproof it could survive a missile strike. By sunrise, he hit send. The report went to 3 places: the local news outlet, the city's HOA oversight division, and most importantly, a group chat made by half the Willow Bend homeowners titled "Save Our Block." Within hours, Karen's reputation was collapsing in real time. The woman who once walked door to door like a queen now had residents closing their blinds when she passed. 2 properties withdrew from the HOA's lawn care program. Someone even left a flamingo statue on her porch with a note that read, "Start measuring your own yard." And while Karen scrambled behind curtains, David was on his porch watching Emma paint again. The canvas was half finished, a stormy sky over a house with boarded windows. She didn't have to say it. He knew exactly what it meant. Emma was painting Karen's world, and she was painting it to fall. But the final blow hadn't landed yet. That was coming next. Because David wasn't just exposing her. He was preparing to own her downfall. Karen was backed into a corner, and like any cornered predator, she lashed out. The morning after David's report went public, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into his driveway. For a brief moment, David thought it might be the city finally responding to his complaint. WAS and single quotes T. The deputies stepped out and asked to speak with him. Karen had filed a police report accusing David of public harassment, unauthorized surveillance, and emotional endangerment of a neighborhood official. She even claimed she was being stalked. The officers were courteous. They had already seen the footage circulating online. They weren't buying it, but they had to follow through. David invited them in, played the unedited videos, and presented printed emails, signed HOA forms, and violation letters that contradicted Karen's timeline. They stayed barely 30 minutes before one of them shook his hand and said, "We'll be closing this one, sir." But it wasn't the cops that day who delivered the real punch. It was the city clerk's office. At 3:15 p.m., an official letter arrived, notifying the HOA of a pending audit. Based on David's evidence, the city had opened a formal investigation into Willow Bend's HOA leadership for fraudulent fines, illegal enforcement procedures, and unethical conduct. Karen went silent for 2 full days. No morning walks, no patrols, no clipboard. But that didn't mean she was done. Late Friday night, David was working in the garage when he heard a crack. Not a car door or a gate, but glass. Then a low thud. He ran outside. Emma's mural, the one she'd painted on the side fence, was gone. Not painted over, smashed. Wood slats shattered. Paint streaked across the lawn. Torn canvas fragments fluttered under the porch light like dead leaves. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide. David's breath locked in his chest. It wasn't just vandalism. It was personal, cruel, targeted. The security camera by the side yard had caught everything. Karen, alone, wielding a small sledgehammer from her gardening shed. She didn't just destroy the mural. She took her time. She swung and screamed, ripping down the boards one by one like she was gutting the house itself. David didn't call the HOA. He didn't call the police either, not yet. Instead, he called someone else. The next morning, a camera crew from Channel 7 Action News pulled into his driveway. The reporter was already familiar with the footage. They had been reviewing the files he submitted earlier in the week. But the mural's destruction? That was the tipping point. The segment aired that night. It started with David sitting beside Emma in the backyard, the broken fence behind them, her hands clutching a single surviving paintbrush. Then it cut to the footage, Karen in the act. No doubt about it. The anchor's voiceover was clear, in a stunning expose. A local HOA leader is under fire after being caught on camera vandalizing a teen's autism awareness mural. What began as a neighborhood dispute has turned into a full-scale investigation. The neighborhood didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, Karen's home was the epicenter of attention. Reporters camped outside, neighbors whispered on sidewalks. A small group placed candles at the base of the broken fence with handwritten notes, "We see you, Emma." And inside her house, Karen was spiraling. Because at 9 a.m., the HOA board held an emergency session without her. David wasn't just invited. He was the one who called for it. He brought printed copies of everything: video stills, audit letters, board email chains, even testimonials from 4 families who had remained quiet until now. The room was dead silent as he read Karen's own words aloud from a board meeting log. "People like Emma are disruptive. If I can push them out quietly, I will." The vote was unanimous. Karen was stripped of her title as HOA president. Her security access was revoked, and all fines, sanctions, and threats issued against David and Emma were nullified. But the story wasn't over. As the meeting adjourned, David's phone buzzed. A lawyer representing multiple neighbors had seen the news, and they wanted David's help in filing a class action lawsuit against Karen and the HOA. The Queen of Willow Bend had fallen, but the castle she built, it was about to crumble under the weight of justice. Karen was no longer seen walking the sidewalks. No clipboards. No little dog in her purse. No condescending waves from her porch. She had vanished into her home like a villain at the end of the second act, trying to rewrite the script before the final curtain. But David wasn't done. He had joined the class action suit as the lead plaintiff. backed by 5 other families who had suffered under Karen's reign of petty tyranny. Greg Simmons, now fully back in action, used his inside knowledge to help prepare the filings. The HOA's entire administrative structure was now under forensic audit, with investigators crawling through old invoices and board meeting minutes. It wasn't just fines anymore. There were allegations of misappropriated funds, falsified home violation reports, and HOA money being spent on non-board approved beautification projects, which conveniently only improved the houses of Karen's closest allies. Still, Karen wasn't giving up without a fight. From inside her fortress of curtains and suspicion, she fired back. A new letter was hand-delivered to David's home, this time not by her or any HOA staff but by a private attorney. She was suing David for character defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to sabotage community leadership. Emma saw the envelope before David did. She picked it up, stared at the thick paper, and turned it over in her hands like it might explode. David opened it calmly. Read it once. Then, with Emma standing beside him, tore it clean down the center and dropped it in the trash. She's still trying to be the monster in your story, he said. But you already took her power away the moment you kept painting. Emma didn't say anything, but she nodded, slow and firm. The next day, the community held a neighborhood gathering, not HOA-sponsored, but something spontaneous, organized by the residents on their own. A barbecue at the park, free drinks, kids running barefoot on the grass. David hadn't planned to go, but Emma surprised him. She asked to bring a canvas. When they arrived, people clapped softly. Emma set up her easel near the gazebo and began to paint, eyes locked in quiet focus, colors blooming across the canvas as people watched from a respectful distance. It wasn't until half an hour in that the whispers started. Someone noticed a news van parked near the park entrance. A familiar face stepped out. It was the same Channel 7 reporter who'd aired the mural story. They hadn't come for David this time. They had come for Emma. The reporter didn't rush her. She stood quietly, waiting. Emma glanced over once, then twice, then, to David's complete shock, she nodded. Minutes later, a small interview unfolded. Emma's first real public words since the nightmare began. Her voice was soft, but steady. I don't like noise, she said, but I like colors. And when people try to erase them, it feels like they're erasing me. The reporter asked what she wanted people to know. Emma thought carefully, then said, I'm not the problem. Bullies are. And it's okay to be quiet if your art is loud. The segment aired that same night, and the floodgates opened. Support poured in from across the state. Letters, art supplies, messages from other autistic teens who'd felt silenced in neighborhoods just like hers. The lawsuit against Karen picked up steam. The city launched an HOA reform initiative, named after the incident, Emma's Rights Act, designed to protect homeowners and their families from HOA abuse, especially those with disabilities. Karen, now facing multiple civil cases and a formal ethics hearing, tried to plead her case on a neighborhood forum. Her post was downvoted into oblivion in under 2 minutes. Even her closest allies had gone silent. And while she sat in her dark house with drawn curtains and no friends, Emma was asked to showcase her work at the City Gallery's spring exhibition. She didn't hesitate, because Karen had tried to silence her. But Emma, she had painted her way into a movement. Karen's silence didn't last forever. It never does with people like her. They don't retreat, they reload. For 2 weeks, she stayed hidden inside her home, blinds drawn and porch empty, while the community she once ruled reclaimed its freedom. But under the surface, something darker was brewing. David knew the quiet was artificial. He'd seen it before. In war zones and interrogation rooms, the moment just before a desperate person makes their last reckless move. And Karen, she was running out of moves. The lawsuit against her was officially on the court docket. She faced charges of criminal mischief, harassment, and civil damages from multiple families. Emma's story had triggered a county-wide investigation into HOA abuse. Karen's empire had crumbled, but she wasn't going to let it die peacefully. At 3:46 a.m. on a Friday morning, it happened. David woke to a strange sound outside, like tearing fabric mixed with the scrape of metal. He got to the front door just in time to see flames. Emma's newest mural, displayed on a portable board by the driveway, was engulfed in fire. The edges hissed and curled, the paint blistering in the orange glow. A bottle rolled away from the base, still warm, with a rag hanging from its mouth. It wasn't a random act. It wasn't a message. It was arson. David rushed outside with a fire extinguisher and doused it before it reached the house. Emma stood in the hallway behind him, barefoot and shaking, her eyes locked on the smoke trailing up into the sky. The police arrived quickly, this time no room for technicalities anymore. They examined the scene, took samples from the scorched ground, and collected the bottle. One officer knelt near the porch camera. "It's all on here, right?" he asked. David nodded. "Every frame." And it was. Karen had crept across the lawn in a black hoodie, but her walk gave her away. Same pace, same posture. And when she turned toward the flame to watch her work, just for a second her face lit up in the firelight, clear as day. But the trap hadn't ended there. Earlier that week, David had suspected something was coming. So he'd set up a second layer of protection motion sensors across the lawn that linked to a silent alert system on his phone. But more importantly, he'd placed a GPS tracker inside the new mural base. The moment the fire started, it had pinged a signal to his backup server. Karen hadn't just destroyed property. She'd walked right into a digital web. And David wasn't the only one who noticed. By noon, the footage was in the hands of law enforcement, his lawyer, the local news, and the HOA oversight committee. But most devastating of all, it was delivered to Karen's mortgage holder. Why? Because part of her home's funding came from a grant agreement tied to her role as HOA president. A grant with a strict no criminal conduct clause. By sunset, her house was flagged for immediate foreclosure proceedings. David didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He simply took Emma out for ice cream, letting the chaos unravel on its own. Meanwhile, across town, Karen was arrested on charges of felony arson and endangerment. And when she was walked out of her own front door in cuffs, reporters swarmed the lawn she once ruled with fines and fear. David's doorbell rang at 6:22 p.m. It was Greg, smiling wide. "They're towing her Lexus." David just nodded, calm and steady. Took long enough. Later that night, as neighbors gathered around Emma's scorched mural to leave flowers and replacement paintbrushes, someone set up a whiteboard next to the ashes. Emma stepped forward, uncapped a marker, and drew a single symbol, a phoenix, simple, bold, rising. The crowd clapped quietly. Some cried. And across the neighborhood, porch lights flicked on one by one. No more hiding. No more fear. The fire, Karen said, didn't burn Emma's voice. It made her message louder. Karen Stark's fall wasn't a crash. It was a slow, public disintegration. A woman who had built her power on silence and fear, now forced to watch it all come undone under a spotlight she couldn't control. She was arraigned 2 days after the fire, charged with felony arson, reckless endangerment, property destruction, and multiple counts of civil harassment. The judge denied bail. The prosecutor cited her ongoing threat to the safety of a minor. Karen didn't speak. She looked stunned, like she'd wandered into her own nightmare. But the real twist hadn't even landed yet. While the neighborhood celebrated her removal, while media outlets ran headlines like "HOA tyrant faces justice," and teens' artwork becomes symbol, of reform. Something even more unexpected was unfolding behind closed doors. Because this wasn't just about one woman's cruelty. It was about a broken system that let her thrive. The day after Karen's arrest, the city announced a formal HOA review task force, backed by a state initiative. They called it the Emma Cole Resolution. The bill would push mandatory oversight on local HOA letters, add protections for residents with disabilities, and prohibit unregulated enforcement by board members. Karen had become the face of abuse. Emma had become the face of change. Meanwhile, David received a letter in the mail not from the HOA, not from the city, but from a private real estate firm based in Dallas. They were buying Karen's foreclosed property, quickly, quietly, and they wanted him to know because one of their investors had specifically requested the home be turned into a nonprofit studio space for autistic youth. The investor, Greg Simmons. David had no words, just a long, slow exhale and the rare sensation of closure settling in. He agreed to help organize the transition. Within a week, Karen's former home was being gutted, painted, and repurposed, her legacy rewritten. But the final blow came during the lawsuit settlement. Karen, desperate for leniency, offered a deal. She'd surrender control of all HOA operations permanently, pay restitution to the affected families, and issue a formal public apology in exchange for dropping the civil suit. The group declined. They wanted it on the record. They wanted it in court. And in that courtroom, with dozens of neighbors seated behind David and Emma, Karen was forced to listen as the judge read every charge aloud. She was no longer the intimidating figure on the sidewalk. She was a cautionary tale in handcuffs. When asked if she had anything to say, she whispered, "I never meant for it to go that far." The judge replied flatly, "It went further than you'll ever understand." Karen was sentenced to 5 years probation, 1 year of house arrest, and over $75,000 in damages. She lost her home, her position, her reputation. She would never serve on any board again. And as she walked out of the courtroom, she passed Emma in the hallway. Emma didn't flinch. She simply opened her sketchbook and held up a page, an illustration of a garden growing through broken concrete. Karen stopped, looked at it. Then kept walking. The neighborhood moved forward. The HOA board was completely restructured. David was asked to serve on the oversight committee. He declined, but helped draft their new charter one that included community events, anti-harassment policies, and clear protections for all residents. Emma's studio opened 3 months later. She called it the Quiet Canvas. Her first exhibit featured works by young artists across the state, each one touched in some way by exclusion, silence, or judgment. But the final piece in the show wasn't hers. It was a canvas left blank, mounted on the wall with a simple plaque beneath it. "This is what happens when fear wins." Next to it was another, "And this is what happens when we don't let it." The room was silent when the crowd read those words. But in that silence, there was no fear anymore. There was strength. There was healing. There was Emma. And for Karen Stark, the woman who tried to control a neighborhood and destroy a child's voice, she paid the ultimate price. Not with fire. Not with fines, but by watching the very people she tried to silence become impossible to ignore.